we sing your praises loud. Sing them to the stumbling crowd. Sing of Jesus and his word. Sing until the earth has heard. Sing of grace, sing until we see his face. God is why we live and sing. We the servants, he the king. All his power, all his life, living in the church, his wife. God is justice, God is love. God is reigning from above. God is sovereign o'er the land. Nations bow at his command. Life is but a passing glance. Seek him while you have the chance. We are made of naught but clay, till we change on that great day.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, church family. My name is Richard Buckner. I'm one of the evangelists at GPCC, and I'm excited to give you the lesson today. We continue on in the year of the Bible, and it's been awesome. So go online and check those, all the videos. If you're here on on the YouTubes, you'll be able to see them. We're going to be continuing on in the book of Esther today, which is an incredible story. But we are going to do something a little bit different. I know in the past when I cover year of the Bible lessons, I cover 3 questions. We're not going to do those questions today. We're really just going to read the story. The story is it plays a more palatable, if you will, to narrative form. And there's some books like that. The David story with Goliath plays this way. Ruth definitely plays this way. Esther plays this way. Jonah plays this way. So you have some stories that you can read that really from start to finish is pretty much a great accounting of a narrative that follows a beginning and an end and have pretty clear and defined characters that you're not swimming through a bunch of like random names or, again, they're not random in God's eyes, but are longer names or names are just not really familiar to us. And so it's easier to forget them, sadly. And so this one is pretty cool. So we're just going to read through and hop really into the story. And again, it is such a great story. Again, I'll explain later of those different elements and how we want to read it. But the book of Esther is very unique in a couple of ways. One being that we get this really through the whole story, no mention of God at all. We do get mention of the Jews, but we don't get any mention of God. The story, like I said before, plays even more to more of a fable or really a story in terms of the beginning, middle, and end. And it almost plays like a fairy tale, having Esther as like an orphan, spoiler alert, who becomes a queen and would eventually save her people because of her position. And so those things are really great. But before we jump to the story, what I always like to do is give a cast of characters. And that helps me follow the story. It helps me imagine the story when I have a face to name. And again, this is just my imagination. This is not thus says the Lord, obviously, because these people are still alive. But I like to cast characters, some of the main characters, and we have 4 main characters in the story. We have Esther, who's the main one, main person. We have Mordecai, her cousin, her older cousin, who is very instrumental. We have Xerxes, and then the real name is like a really difficult name to mention, but he's the Persian king here that is in charge. And then we have Haman, who is the king's official, one of his high officials. And he plays the bad guy, right? The sinister, the mustache twirling bad guy. And again, very clear characters with very clear roles. And so when I look at the story, I like to cast these characters and have my own actors or vision of actors I've seen in the past that kind of would play these roles, right? If I had the big budget, had all expenses or no expense is too much, then these are the people I would have in the movie. So let's hop on into Esther chapter 1. And again, you'll see the slide on screen. And so just to give you, each slide will have a picture of one of those characters. It's kind of the main thing through the chapter, just to help guide your thoughts in your mind. But we're going to hop right on in, and we're just going to go through the book. I'm going to give some thoughts, share some insight, some things that we can take away, but really just sit back and enjoy just reading God's word. So in Esther chapter 1, verse 1, we're only going to go through verse 8 here. Just it gives us a good sense. It says, "This is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. And at that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet to all of his nobles and his officials, military leaders of Persia and Media, and the princes and nobles and provinces that were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed his vast wealth and his kingdom in splendor and glory and majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days." So it's like he's partying and then he's extending the party, right? "For additional 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace, for all the people from the least to the greatest who were there in the citadel of Susa." So everybody's there, least to the greatest. Verse 6. "Then a garden hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords and white and purple material to silver rings and marble pillars. And there were couches of gold and silver, and a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold." I mean, this is like some ancient, awesome medieval stuff. "Each different from each other, and the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality." Say that word twice, right? "By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink with no restrictions." That's a good thing, right? I'm not saying as a pastor, but I'm saying in that time, if you had a party, you're drinking with no restrictions, you're having a good time. "And for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished." So these first couple of chapters, again, you can please go back and read on your own and take in much of the chapter. Again, for the sake of time, we're just going to hop around. But these first 8 verses give you a sense of who King Xerxes is. Because later on, he ends up offending his then wife, Vashti, by asking a request. Now, in the passage, there's a lot of reading into the text, but most commentaries and scholars believe that what he was asking Vashti, because he goes and tells his wife to come and display her beauty to all the guys. So it's like this kind of smoking room with a bunch of men who own companies, right? If it was today, and he's showcasing, all of his possessions. Sadly, right? It's kind of your typical guy of the world who has a lot of money is trying to put on display his possessions, and his wife being one of them in the ancient world. Definitely saw women as possessions, and so he brings in Vashti and says, "Hey, show the guys your beauty," right, at these elaborate parties. But in the text, when you go and read, you got to read into the text, because scholars believe that what he was asking is for her to come in nude and to display her body in front of everyone in the nude. And she obviously flatly denied that request. And that request ended up setting the motion of him taking her out in terms of removing her from being queen. And so that's pretty crazy. And I just think of there's certain things that we see that are still issues today, right? You see the have and the have-nots, right? Privilege versus those who don't, how they wield those things, these parties of the elite. The church, even in the first century, struggled with this. Read 1 Corinthians. It's highly affected by those who are mixing with elites of their day, and some in the church are elites, and then some in the church are not. They're low of the low. And that dynamic causes friction. It causes prejudice. It causes division. We are not divorced from that today, and it's sad when you see that. You get into chapter 1 and you can see just the power play and how that all fit. Okay, we're going to pick up in verse 1 of chapter 2 and continue on with the story. It says, "Later, King Xerxes' fury had subsided. He remembered Vashti and what she had done and what he had decreed about her. The king's personal attendants proposed, 'Let a search be made for the beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province in his realm and bring all these beautiful young women into the harem in the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let the beauty treatments be given to them.'" In verse 4, "And then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. I bet he did. It sounds like good advice for a king. And verse 5, "Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, and the son of Shimei, son of Kish, and he had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive with Jehoiakim, king of Judah. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Again, just a side note, you get to see that Esther was an orphan, for those who are not familiar with the story, and kind of plays into that fairy tale that I talked about earlier. Verse 8, "When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa to put under the care of Hegai. Esther also was taken into the king's palace and entrusted to Hegai, who was in charge of the harem. She pleased him being the king, and won his favor. Immediately he provided her with beauty treatments and special food. He assigned her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants to the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her." We're going to drop down to verse. Actually, no, let's take a talk about this. So, this is cool as we see that all the setup, right, is all the dominoes are in place because the king got rid of Vashti, or Vashti, however you want to say it. And you see that he's on a search to replace. I need a queen. And when we read in chapter 1, he has all these provinces. I think it was 127. And then there was another additional 180 connections of other areas and outposts, right? And so he sends representatives, again, much like a Cinderella story, to all these places to go and gather these young virgins to be brought back to him and put into the harem. And he would just choose, right? He would spend time, and it's almost kind of like The Bachelor. It's like an ancient form of The Bachelor. He's meeting with each one of these virgins, spending time with them, going out, and he's deciding who he wants to be with. And they're going on a date, so to speak, and he gets to get to know them, wines and dines, they get to spend, brings them back to his apartment, so to speak. And then, he goes through each one of these girls to try to figure out who will be the queen. Who's the one I'm connected to? Who would I give the red rose to, right? We're going to pick up in verse 15. It says, when the turn came for Esther, a young woman of Mordecai had adopted, the daughter of his uncle Abihail, to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch, was in charge of the harem, suggested. So she's leaning on the advice of Haggai, which is smart, because Haggai would know the king. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. So it seems pretty popular how she's interacting with everyone that she meets. It's much like the story of Ruth. Everyone just loved Ruth, the way when she was working the fields, when she had moved with her mother-in-law and Naomi, and got a chance to meet Boaz when she was working the fields. Everybody loved her, and she has that infectious personality, and that wins people, right? I mean, beauty takes you to an extent, but really, it's who you are that really wins people. Your personality that really wins people, I believe. Verse 16. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence of the 10th month of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign. And now the king was attracted to Esther more than any other of the women. And she won his favor and approval more than any other virgins. And so he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And the king gave a great banquet, an Esther's banquet, for all of his nobles and officials. And he proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed the gifts with the royal liberality. And, here you see just this effect that she's having on King Xerxes, that she wins him over. She wins the rose, right? She is the winner of The Bachelor of Persia, right? Ancient Persia. And she makes it. She's the one that has risen all the way to the top, and this is a proud moment and a cool moment to see this happening. Then later on, we're not going to be able to get to it, but later on in the chapter, there are some assassins that happen to want to take out King Xerxes. Mordecai gets wind to it, tells Esther, and then Esther gets the king saved, but also puts in a good name for Mordecai. She's already using her position and ability to really win over not just the king, which she's done, but to really be a pivotal piece for her people, right? She's in her mind, she's got she's a Jew. She's like, man, her people's on her heart. And she very shrewdly is like saying, hey, there's a hit on you. And one of my guys that found it out, his name is Mordecai. And she helps get Mordecai risen to a higher rank as well. So we're going to pick up in Esther, verse 1 of chapter 3. And this is off the coattails of escaping a near assassination on King Xerxes' part. He is now looking to raise up another official. This is where Haman enters the picture. And also a good word from Mordecai also gets a bump too in notice of honor. And so in Esther 3, verse 1, it says, after these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, elevating him in a seat of honor higher than all of his nobles, all the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel down and pay honor. The royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore they told Haman about it, whether to see if Mordecai's behavior would be tolerated, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay honor, he was enraged, and having learned that Mordecai's people, who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all of Mordecai's people, the Jews, throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, and the month of Nisan, the poor, that is, the lot, was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and month. And the lot fell in the 12th month of the month of Adar. And then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There's a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all the other people, and they do not obey the king's laws. And it is the king's best interest to it is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them." Verse 9, "If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal's treasury." So the king took his signet ring and his finger and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." And we'll stop there. Here you see that here is the I guess I would say the foolishness or the looseness, in a sense, of King Xerxes, of just listening to whoever his officials are telling him. And I don't know if that's uncommon to most kings of the ancient times. You do have stronger kings that are sharp-witted and are looking to take control. I mean, Solomon was one of them that we look back then. But then there's others that they rely on, right? They're just the face. But they are relying largely on the intellect and wisdom of their officials around them, right? It's like a president in his cabinet. And so you have Haman, who's getting wind of Mordecai's ethnicity, right? He sees that he's a Jew. And again, we're coming off the tail end of a crazy Babylonian, exile that the Babylonians had captured the Jews, and then when they were taken over by the Persians, Persians inherit these slaves, so to speak, and King Cyrus is like, "Hey, you guys go back home. What are you here? You go back home," right? And again, only a portion are gone, but there's still some there. And you can see that when we have this issue today, sadly, of people, when you have people who migrate into a country, are not looked on favorably by the people who live in that country. And you have a sentiment of Haman giving that type of prejudice towards these people. And like, we need to get rid of them, right? Advocating the death to all of the Jews. And it's just crazy. These same type of relationships, like Persia, then would be modern day or connections to Iran. And so it's insane that, man, there's still tensions in these relationships even today, right? And you have Haman, who's set out to take out, God's people. And King Xerxes, unknowingly, is just a fall victim to. Much like in the New Testament, we see Pilate, who's washing his hands from the situation and just handing responsibility over to another group of people, which ironically was the Jews themselves. And so, it's a tale of these tensions that we have as humans and wanting to destroy each other because we're not doing this or we're not doing that. But if you notice of the accusation of this goes back to Mordecai not kneeling down to pay honor to the king, right? Now, Haman's trying to be politicking and try to eliminate any situation or factors or greed or just prejudice in his heart to just get rid of people, right? But it's caused by Mordecai's faith. Now, we backed up. We talked about God is not mentioned, but here's where you see the fingerprints of God, right? Why is Mordecai kneeling down, not paying honor? Well, in the Torah, you don't worship other gods. And you definitely don't worship men as gods. So he's not paying honor to him. That's a sign, right? If we could put like a signpost, right, or a pop-up notification bubble right over the head of Mordecai saying, here's a faithful Jew, right? Here's a Yahweh follower. It's so cool. You know, as we go to chapter 4, we're going to see the similar thing. Okay, so we are going to hop into chapter 4, and we're going to read a bit of chapter 4 here. Again, enter the characters of Esther and Mordecai. These are going to be kind of our main characters. So verse 1 of Esther chapter 4 says, when Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes. Again, we talked about the previous night. The edict had gone out in terms of really annihilating all of the Jews. And this tearing of clothes is this big sign of just disgust and distress. We see that when the high priest tears his clothes when Jesus, in his mind, he sees that Jesus is claiming blasphemy, and he tears his clothes. So this tearing of clothes is huge. It's an outward sign of like, of what you're feeling. So you are really not doing well when you're tearing clothes. And he puts on sackcloth and ashes, which again kind of furthers that point. He went out to the city wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because because no one could clothe in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. Verse 3. In every province which the edict and the order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him and to put on him instead of his sackcloth. But he would not accept them. Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, assigned to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. And so Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go to the king's presence and to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Verse 9, Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. And then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the peoples of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned to the king, but has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to the king. We'll stop there. It's like, she's like, this all sounds great, but if I approach the king, I could die, right? Like there's stakes all around, right? She doesn't do it, the edict goes out, the Jews die. But if she does do it, then she could die, then they all die anyway, right? Like it's like a stalemate that at least she feels, and that she's cornered, and there's nothing that she could do. In verse 12 we read, when Esther's words reported back to Mordecai, he sent back the answer. Do not think that just because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. Like he's throwing it back at her. Verse 14, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish, right? He's saying that you can try to hide out if you want, but it will come to ruin to you at some point, right? You can only hide out for so long, and that's a lesson, right? We'll circle back on that. You can only hide out for so long. But here's the money shot in terms of the famous verse. It says, and who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this, right? Then he brings it back into perspective, right? And here's again, those fingerprints of God, he brings it back into perspective. You're put in this position for a reason. God has you here, right? He doesn't verbally say that, but that's what he's alluding to. God has you here for a reason. to save his people, right? Like, that's the promise. The promise, right? Jesus, he's the Prince of his promise. He's the promise of salvation, and it's in his line. If the Jews are eradicated, there is no line, right? Now, we know some Jews had left to go back to Jerusalem, but everyone's feeling this. You've got to fight for your people. Verse 15, then Esther sent a reply to Mordecai, go and gather all the Jews in Susa and fast for me, right? She's like, if I'm going to do this, y'all better be fasting. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, or day or night. And I and my attendants will fast as you do. Like, she's saying, I'm doing the same thing. I'm not just asking you to do what I wouldn't do, right? When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Again, another famous line. And who knows how much time has passed, but she's got to a point where she's like, I'll do it. But I need you to fast. We'll fast. We're going to bring this together, and I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I die, I die, right? And so Mordecai went away and carried out Esther's instructions, which means they went out and they fasted. In chapter 5, in verse 1, it says, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court and the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out his gold scepter. That's the signal, right? That was in his hand. And so Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. And I want to stop there. Like, here's the fingers of God, right? She's going thinking like, that's it. I'm going to just be just wiped out, like killed immediately. But God's working in all these different ways. And so it's funny. I mean, if this was a film, she's stressing out and like, man, doom and gloom, and I'm going to die. But in his hand, he's just chilling and, just looking around, and he sees her and he's just happy. He's like, I'm happy with her, right? Which is great. I'm glad the marriage is going well, because if it wasn't going well, this story could have ended differently. But the marriage is going well. He is pleased with Esther. She is a great queen, great wife to him. And that bodes well. That relationships matter. Whether married or not, your relationships matter and how you treat people. And she was just a great person. She was a faithful Jew. And the way she connected with people, it left a great impression. And that saved her. I mean, the king, look, he wasn't like, oh my gosh, she's breaking rules. I mean, he's a pretty loose dude anyway. But he's like, wow, like, I am so happy that I'm married to this woman. And he extends out the gold scepter. God works through him through that. And she sees her cue. Verse 3, then the king asks, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, and it'll be given to you. I mean, this dude is over heels, right, for her. Like, it's like, whoa. He's like, I'll give you half the kingdom if you want it. It's yours, right? That's the type of relationship that she has. And so what does that do? The next couple chapters in both 6 into 7, the rest of 5, 6 into 7, she's now going to set up this arrangement of a banquet so that she can present her request. We fast forward to chapter 7 and verse 1. It says, and she invites Haman too, because she wants to set this whole thing up. So the king and Haman went to the Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it would be granted. And he repeats it. Verse 3, Queen Esther answered, if I found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. She kind of just kind of drives the knife in there, right, to make some, it is intense, but she's driving it home. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress was justified to serving the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Who is he, the man who dared to do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman. And she points to the dude. I mean, I don't know. I imagine pointing to the dude. He's him, right? And then Haman was terrified. He's like, what? I'm sure this was out of the left field. This dude, He was like, we're chilling. I'm chilling with the queen. He's chilling with his wife. We're eating and drinking. I'm getting sauced up. Like it's all good. And now it's like, what? You can hear the turntable like skip, right? Or stop, or the needles drag across the record. And he's like, whoa, like, wow. Like the tables have turned. And he is spinning out of orbit right now. In verse 7, the king got up and raged and left his wine and went out into the palace garden. This dude had to cool off. He was so angry. And Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as he returned from the palace garden, the banquet hall, Haman was fallen on the couch, and this is comical, where Esther was reclining, and he exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she's still with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. And he was like, I'm doomed, right? You see the scene, like he's begging for her, like leaning and probably touching her leg or her ankle or something like that. King walks in. It looks like he's trying to seduce her or trying to take advantage of her, assault her. So, I mean, it does not look good for Haman right now. Verse 9, then the Arbana, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching its height to 50 cubits, standing by Haman's house. He had it set up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. I mean, now the eunuchs are coming in, right? And the king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole and had it set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. We're going to skip over to chapter 8, verse 1. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king. For Esther had told him how he was related to her. And the king took off his signet ring and had it reclaimed from Haman and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. And Esther again pleaded with the king, falling to his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. And then the king extended the gold scepter again. We see that signal again to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and think it is the right thing to do, and if he's pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For he can bear, for how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see destruction of my family? So King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, because of Haman's attack of the Jews, and had given him estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he had set up. Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews, as it seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with this ring can be revoked. And so we stop there, and he goes and he sends out this edict, and he sends it out to the crowd of people throughout all the provinces, both Jews and non-Jews, and it's to cancel what was already sent out, right? So the edict already been sent out, and of to kill the Jews. And so another one is sent out to say the Jews can defend themselves, that anyone that's at hand, the Jews can annihilate them. So no one's going to now, have a free-for-all. It's almost like the movie The Purge, right? There's one night where you can have all violence and not have any consequences. That was basically the first edict, was like, you can go out and kill the Jews and be fine, right? But now it says, no, this edict is that they can defend themselves and they can fight back. And so everyone's like, well, I'm not gonna throw hands if that's gonna come back on me and my family. I'm gonna leave them alone, right? And so it literally brings salvation to the Jews, that they could avenge, fight for themselves. This was incredible. Esther standing up and in linking both chapter 7, what happened in chapter 7, and her standing up to the king and now having this banquet and saying what's on her heart, saying she wants to save her people, and then rats out Haman. I mean, it all comes into line the way it's intended to be, the way God wanted it to be. And this is incredible for her. Incredible amount of faith and strength and courage to get to this place, that now she is saved her people. And this edict goes out. No Jews are harmed. And in chapter 9 is where we end. In verse 20, we see the results of it. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, and had them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days in the month of Adar, as a time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, as in the month where their sorrow was turned into joy, the morning turned into the day of celebration. He wrote to them to observe the days and days of feasting and joy, and give presents and food to one another and gifts to the poor. And so the Jews agreed and continued the celebration that had begun doing what Mordecai had written them. And this is cool. This is the results. The results is a big celebration. It's a celebration that's called Purim. Purim. And it's a celebration that happens right before Passover. So it happens like in between winter and spring. So I would assume at the end of February into March, right? And it's one commentator, scholar said it's a holy version of Mardi Gras, which thank God is a holy version, because Mardi Gras is crazy and don't recommend that. I got a lot of family and connections to New Orleans, and mom's originally born and raised in New Orleans, and so craziness. And so, man, to see a holy version of that would be cool, right? And so in this version, you can go up and look up on YouTube Purim or Celebration of Purim. There's a lot of great videos out there to educate you. But they dress up, and it's cool that the little girls, you see them dress up as princesses in light of Esther, and they be little Esthers. And most people dress up as biblical figures. But nowadays it's gotten to a point where everyone's dressed up like Batman and Spider-Man. It's become like a version of Halloween mixed with Mardi Gras. And so they go up, but they're wearing masks because the masks are to symbolize God's workings behind the scenes to do good and to save his people. And when they wear these masks, they go out to celebrate and also to give to the poor. That's what we see here. Now, nowadays, it's maybe people are giving items or giving gifts to those who are in need. Again, acting as God. So it's incredible to see that connection and what, Esther's fate and faith and courage, what it has caused, and even to this day, being celebrated, right? But even us as Christians, we have that connection in that, because Jesus is the greater Esther. Jesus, like Esther, goes before the high council, right? Goes before a lot of people, and ultimately before God as sacrifice, right? As tribute, right? If this was Hunger Games, it's like, I offer myself as tribute. Like, I want to sacrifice and die for humanity, right? It's not just for the Jews, it's for all of humanity. And he stepped out on faith, knowing that he would get killed for it. And that's so cool, right? Because the same edict went out for all of humanity. When Adam and Eve left the garden, there was an edict went out called sin that's plagued and has been plaguing humanity since the beginning. And that we're cursed because of it, and that we die because we no longer live forever because of it. And so Jesus, he creates a new edict by his death, right? To cancel the one sent out. That he takes on that death. He takes on the sin, right? If he was in Esther's day, he'd be the one that says, I will die so that the edict could be done away with. And he did for you and I, so that we may have salvation, much like the Jews in the book of Esther. And that our celebration, right, is an honor to him of our faith, our devotion every day. And there's some cool things that we do within kind of the rituals of Christianity, right? Taking communion, that's part of a kind of a Purim celebration. When we see someone baptized, that's part of kind of a Purim celebration. But also just, again, every day praying to God and thanking him. When we get together as brothers and sisters in celebration, where they have like a tea pack, if you're not familiar with that, you're on here, it's a Temple Performing Arts service we have a couple times a year. It's a celebration for us to come together and recognize what God has done. I think it's just cool to know about the roots of Esther and what it leads to the Jewish holiday of Purim, but even greater what God has done for you and I through Jesus. Being like Esther, right? So cool. And I hope this encourages you. I hope that this helps broaden your faith. But I want to challenge you too to stand up like Esther and ultimately stand up like Jesus for your faith and not hiding your identity and what God is doing in your life. Thanks. Thanks again for joining our live stream service. We have discussion questions located in the description for deeper reflection on today's sermon. If you're visiting with us and you want to get connected, you can visit our website at gpcc.org, click on the Contacts tab, and send us your information. And we will reach out and connect with you as soon as possible. We will end with one last song to end our live stream service. We are encouraged you joined us this morning, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Oh man, that was awesome. I love that we get to worship together. It's so much fun, guys. You know, this time is full of so much uncertainty, and there is so much opportunity for us to give way to fear. And I just love this song that we're about to sing because it talks directly about that. And it reminds us that we are children of God and He is in control, and we don't have to be afraid of anything. So I encourage you to sing this with us and really focus on the words and choose to believe that God has each and every one of you in His hands, and He will bring each and every one of you through this time. You unravel me with a melody. You surround me with a song of deliverance from my enemies, till all my fears are gone. Now I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. No, I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me. Your love has called my name, and I've been born again into your family. Your blood flows through my veins. From my mother's womb, you have chosen me.